Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to the next in this series of podcasts that I've been doing across the past few months of various people from various walks of life and various parts of the animal welfare and care sector. We've interviewed an extraordinary number of people from various occupations and volunteers in different areas as well. And today we've got a very special guest. Someone who has done an extraordinary amount of work to ensure that the largest e-petition in the parliamentary history in Victoria was able to be tabled in the last sitting week. It was the largest by over 10,000, and it is just incredible the amount of support that this extraordinary woman and her partners have been able to drum up in support of a particular issue that we'll be bringing to the chamber a bit later in October. But the first and the biggest piece of work was what this extraordinary woman was able to do in getting that petition up. And so today, I'm really absolutely chuffed to be chatting with Claire Harris. Now, Claire is, outside of Saving Animals, Claire is an award-winning screenwriter and film producer based here in Melbourne. However, for most of you listening in today, you will know Claire as the foster carer of the beautiful greyhound named Dash, who was killed by a shelter after promising Claire that they would find him a loving forever home. Welcome, Claire, and how are you doing in this extremely challenging time?
Good question. Probably about as well as anybody else in Melbourne, I imagine. We were actually very lucky to foster and now adopt another greyhound. Right, the timing ended up being right at the beginning of the first lockdown, and that has made a huge difference to our quality of life in lockdown. We're very, very happy to have him.
Beautiful. What's his name?
Boots.
Oh, lovely.
Short for Captain Bootstrap.
Extraordinary. Well, look, our listeners have heard me talk about Dash, both in the Parliament and outside, and his tragic death countless times over the last few months. And I know that everyone would love to hear the story in your words, because you lived it, to hear what Dash was like, and how you discovered him, and what actually happened to him, and how you discovered, the series of failures that led to the terrible situation of the ending of Dash's life.
So my partner and I fostered Dash through a large shelter here in Melbourne. We were first-time foster carers and first-time dog owners, or dog carers. We were told that Dash was an easy first-time pet, but we weren't really given any information about him or about his background. So he'd come out of the racing, 5 years in the racing industry. He was not very settled into our home. He was quite comfortable with us. Like right from the very first night, he climbed up on my lap on the couch, and he was very snuggly. Like he liked sleeping like greyhounds generally do, and he liked snuggling with us, and he liked being patted. But he had separation anxiety, so he used to get quite distressed when we left him alone or during the night. So he would, pee in the house, or he would rip things up. He would go after food, and he had he would eat non-food items. But it wasn't most of the time. It was really when he was left alone, and we weren't given any support with that. We asked for support, those like repeatedly after a few days. And it took several weeks for us to finally get support. It was a 6-week program. So when we did actually manage to speak to a behaviourist, it was the last 2 weeks, and they told us to bring him back to the shelter. There was no point. It was too late, and we wouldn't be able to help him. And I specifically asked, is that going to ruin his chances of being adopted? And they said, no, he won't be euthanized, don't worry. Told me exactly what I wanted to hear. But we didn't take Dash back to the shelter, even without support. We kept him for the rest of the foster period. And in the last 2 weeks, basically, he needed sort of a month to settle in. And in the last 2 weeks, his behavior really started improving. He was sleeping through the night. He was not so anxious. He was able to be left alone. He started that we didn't have any more accidents in the house. He started waiting to go outside to go to the bathroom. And the other thing was that he used to be really terrified about going outside. He would kind of freeze up and become non-responsive, and so he wasn't burning any energy because he wouldn't go for walks. But in the last couple of weeks, we started taking him for walks, even runs, and that made a huge difference to his behavior in the house, because then he was much more settled for the rest of the day. And so all of those behaviors, all of those improvements were things that I noted when we did a foster evaluation for Dash. There was no discussion with us as the foster carers when we took Dash back. So with the shelters, the procedure is always at the end of the foster period, you take the animal back to the shelter so it can be adopted out. It doesn't go straight from foster to adoption. And I had to drop him off in the foyer with about a minute sort of handover, and hand over my sheets of paper that were the foster evaluation. And so it was over Christmas. We went back to see my family in Sydney. We were checking the adoption website every day, seeing whether Dash had been listed, because we really missed him. We hadn't been thinking about adopting, but once we handed him back, we really missed him. And so we figured he'll go up for adoption. If he's on the website for a while, then we'll start worrying about what his chances are. But he was never listed on the website. So when we came back to Melbourne a few weeks later, I emailed. There was no follow-up with the foster carers about what happens to the animal. And I asked if he's been adopted out, and they said he's working with a behaviorist, he's doing well, smiley face. And so we went to foster another greyhound through a greyhound rescue organisation. And when they came to do the house inspection, I was chatting to them about Dash and showing them photos. And they said, well, we work with shelters, we'll get him out and get him back into foster care for a longer period and then go so he can go into adoption. And it was through that rescue group that we found, we were never supposed to find out, that we learned that the shelter had euthanized Dash. They'd actually killed him the day before they sent us the email saying that he was alive and doing well. So that was a pretty. It was a very heartbreaking. I actually didn't believe it. I thought that we thought there must be a mistake. Why would they lie to us? And so we sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. It's very upsetting and very disturbing that people would act in such a terrible way. To callously take the life of an animal like that, but then to lie directly about it as well is just reprehensible.
Yeah, it sort of blew my mind, because it was not in any way the reputation of this shelter that I knew about, as a general member of the public. I specifically wanted to go to a large shelter that I thought would have the resources to support us, but instead we didn't get any resources to support us. And it really made me feel like, what was the point? Why have a foster program? Why put him into our care? And it's not only obviously an awful outcome for the animal, but also it's extremely inconsiderate of the emotional investment that you are asking foster carers to make into an animal, and also not using the foster carers as a resource. That we knew Dash better than anybody, and because we'd lived with him, and so if they'd asked us what Dash needed, we were the best position to tell them what Dash needed. And Dash needed more time in foster care. That's actually what he needed. And so we didn't believe it. We thought there must be some mistake, but maybe he was at risk of being euthanized. So we actually called them. No one answered the phone. We asked, can we adopt him? No one responded to our phone call. And then eventually they sent us an email confirming that, yes, he had anxiety issues and PTSD, and it was decided that it was in his best interest to be euthanized.
Well, and that raises a number of valid points from everything that you've said there. First of all, every greyhound that comes out of the industry suffers from PTSD. All of them. They all suffer from anxiety. And yet the industry itself has an adoption program. Yeah. So if these issues can't be overcome, then that program shouldn't be proceeding. Right? That it should just be a given then that all greyhounds, as a maxim, can't survive and shouldn't survive beyond the racing industry and its use for them. Now, we know that obviously to be patently untrue, because greyhounds are adopted in families all over the country at different stages, and they all come out with these issues. My family, we have an adopted greyhound, Sputnik, who also suffered from issues, but we worked with a behaviouralist, we got past these issues. Separation anxiety, PTSD, didn't want to be left alone, destroyed things, became possessive of things, and sometimes, would arc up if those things were removed for any reason, And yet, after working with a behaviouralist to understand the common problems of greyhounds that come out of the industry, within 2 weeks, a completely different dog. Loving, absolutely wonderful, gentle, just extraordinary. And I just find it unbelievable that a supposed shelter, which is supposed to be, we place an awful amount of trust in these places that they know what they're doing, that they didn't even understand the basics that, having now also been in foster care for a while, to place Stash back inside a shelter environment in and of itself produces anxiety, and that they should have understood that, and that anxiety wasn't necessarily representative of an ongoing uncurable behaviour. It was just the circumstances that he found himself in at that time.
And knowing now, having had our new greyhound for 6 months, I mean, it took him 4 months to come out of his shell, and I feel it makes me feel very guilty and very terrible about some of those things to do with separation anxiety. I mean, with the rescue group that we now have, who've given us strategies to manage separation anxiety. I mean, we weren't given strategies. We didn't know how to manage those things to help him.
And that's my point. That's why you shouldn't feel guilty. You should not feel guilty at all.
I think it's inevitable, though.
Well, I understand. But it's the failing of the shelter to provide you with the support that you needed. But in so doing, in failing to supply you with that support, they've also failed Dash. And how many other animals don't know of that they've also failed in the same way?
Well, and it is that system for the foster program, where the animals have to return to the shelter, really completely sets them up to fail, because of course it's this whole cycle of putting an animal in a stressful environment and then killing it because it's stressed, so it has no quality of life, instead of looking at other solutions to remove it from that stressful environment and thereby reduce its stress. And it's something that I found that I was really so shocked by when I pushed for a meeting with senior management. I came with a list of recommendations about how they might change that. I was trying to be proactive in working with them, as someone who'd been through that program, in how you might improve the outcomes. And they said that they would have an internal review, and they came back telling me that they were satisfied with everything that they had, which was what made me realize that they weren't going to change internally. But also I asked them, what other avenues were explored? If Dash was highly stressed in this environment, what other avenues were explored to reduce his stress? And they did not give him medication to treat his anxiety. they did not contact us, the foster carers, and ask if we would take him for a longer period. He had 6 weeks to turn around his behaviour adequately, and they didn't contact a single rescue group, even the handful of greyhound specific rescue groups. And so euthanasia is not applied as a last resort. It's just before anything else is even considered. And that's that cycle of creating stress and then killing animals for stress is sort of, it seems to be how the whole system functions.
Yeah, and look, Dash being killed was clearly heartbreaking, and for so many other people who find themselves in exactly the same position as yourself, those animals that they fostered is equally heartbreaking. And that is the point. And what you've been able to discover and what you've been able to do is expose a system, and a system that is clearly highly dysfunctional. And you obviously realised that as a result, you just couldn't walk away. And you needed to act and to learn more about how that tragedy happened, and others as well, which also must have been heartbreaking for you to hear about. Can you please share with everybody the first steps that you took in addressing when this situation, when you realised that it was just basically common practice?
Yeah, so I mean, I had no idea. I wrote a blog post because I was sad and angry, and I was not expecting the response. 50,000 people read it. I was not expecting the response that I had. And for a few weeks, I was inundated with stories, emails, messages across all my social media platforms, comments of people telling me that their stories, their experiences, sending me pictures of animals that they'd lost. And basically there were all these people out there who were also sad and angry, and a similar thing had happened to them, and they had no idea what to do about it. And it was then that I realized that this wasn't some anomaly. This is actually the process. This wasn't a mistake. The shelter stood by their processes, and they stood by the killing of Dash. The only thing they apologized for was a communication error, which they blamed on one staff member. And it was then, I guess, that I realized, I'd accidentally collected all of these stories, and I still do. I mean, 8 months later, I'm still getting stories. It made me realize that I was sort of in I couldn't walk away. I was sort of in a unique position, I guess, at that point, because people were paying attention to me because of the blog, where I could then sort of turn those stories into some sort of action.
Yeah, and what an action it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, really thanks to the 27,000 Victorians who supported the cause, and it obviously resonated with a lot of people, and a lot of people, even if it hasn't happened to them, they're pet owners, so they can very much imagine being in that situation.
Absolutely. And from all the research and everything that you've learned along the way on this, what do you believe needs to happen so that we can actually see an end to convenience killing?
Oh, it's a big question. So yeah, I have been researching, and I've also spent a lot of time now talking to. I've been contacted by people who've worked in the shelter environment as well as rescue groups and people who've worked in the industry in other capacities. And I think that the first thing is, I think transparency is the first thing. I don't see how you can measure the effectiveness of a system without transparency, and really because without transparent mandatory euthanasia reporting, there's no accountability, and there's also there's no way for government. A lot of these shelters have council contracts, and there's no way for a government to determine whether the shelters are successfully managing those council contracts with taxpayer money. because there's not even any benchmark for what success looks like. How can you measure the performance of a shelter? And the way that it sort of seems to get measured, and the way that was flagged to me in that meeting I had with senior management, is by the intake number. But if you intake 1 million animals and you kill 99% of them, that is not a good animal welfare. I'm not saying they do kill 99%, but that,
No, no.
that's obviously not a good metric to measure animal welfare outcomes.
No.
So
And now carry on, please. No, carry on, please.
So if you look at, and there's no accountability to the community. So if you compare, for example, a lot of our pounds and shelters don't have any public reporting. Some of them have public reporting in the form of pie charts. Some of those pie charts have no figures on them, so they're completely open to interpretation. Some of the shelters, when they do their reporting, might not include the animals that are killed under those council contract, that are killed in the council pounds before they come to the shelter facility. So it's all very ambiguous what any of this actually means.
Part of the job that I have as an MP is that I serve on various parliamentary committees, and we look into a vast range of subjects. You know, the road toll, various things in the Environment and Planning Committee, such as, you know, whether we should lift a moratorium on nuclear power generation is what we're currently looking at. We've got another one coming up with the Extinction and Biodiversity inquiries, a whole range of things. And what is key in all of those committees and inquiries that we get is data collection. Right?
Yeah.
We can't make decisions unless we have the relevant data from experts, lay people, everyone. And one of the things that we've looked at in that respect, and this is directly transferable to this situation, how can we have trust in a system that doesn't have mandatory reporting, public reporting of kill rates, not just kill rates, but specific breeds, reasons why, how they came into the shelter in the first place, the behaviours they exhibited, and what steps were taken to ameliorate those behaviours before euthanasia took place. And that not just that, but that euthanasia needs to be a method of last resort, a system of mercy, if you like, for animals that have been severely injured, who can't survive those injuries, who are suffering from horrible illnesses that are causing them immense pain and they have no quality of life. You know, the same sort of mercy that we've shown in our own voluntary assisted dying laws brought in Victoria. And it's, to me, it doesn't seem to be a very far step to take to extend that mercy across to our non-human animals.
Yeah, I think that the issue with that, I mean, I agree. There seems to be an issue with the way that the Code of Practice is written, which is sort of very vaguely worded, and talks about, I mean, if an animal doesn't fall under, like Dash wasn't aggressive, Dash wasn't a habitual escapee, but there's this other category that's, you know, suffering, and it's very open to interpretation what that actually, and the Code of Practice also doesn't stipulate that euthanasia should be a last resort. So there's no sort of, even in the spirit of the code, expectation that that's the way that it's applied. And I think that the lack of transparency also shows it's also related to a lack of a sort of a long-term goal or objective. You know, what is the purpose of our shelters? If you don't have an objective, a target, then you're just cleaning up mess day by day. And I was going to say, if you look at by contrast, the Dallas City Shelter has a website that has, I mean, this is just to show that this is achievable because it has been achieved in other places. They have a website with a daily report card that shows they have similar intake to some of our large shelters here. And any member of the public can look at the daily report. It's updated even during a pandemic, and you can see what, maybe not as detailed a breakdown as you would like, but you can certainly see every day what the outcome has been for the animals in their care. But they also set a target live release rate. And by doing that, and I think this is part of the broader issue, I think transparency is related to this, they actually invite community involvement. They set this release rate, which is 90% target live release rate, and they invite the community to help them achieve that through fostering, through volunteering, through rescue collaboration, through donations. So it creates this accountability to the public, but also this partnership with the public. And one of the things that has come up a lot in my discussions with people, particularly people who have worked in the shelter environment, is there is in Australia, and I can't explain how it's become this way, but there's a very combative attitude between shelters and the community. And it's something that I felt as a foster carer, it plays out in a lot of different ways, in the fact that no one discussed with us, like brought us into the discussion about Dash's, what would happen to Dash or what was best for Dash. And there seems to be the same sort of combativeness, or maybe they're dismissive about the about rescue groups as well, that only the shelters know what's best for animal welfare, and they don't trust the foster carers or the rescue groups to know what's good for the animals. And it leads to a lot of finger pointing back at, they tend to shift blame every time an issue comes up in the shelters. They shift blame back to the public and say, well, this is because of irresponsible pet ownership, and that's why we're in this mess that we're in. And there's a lot to be said for that, because obviously we were in a situation where we're breeding thousands of cats and dogs each year and killing tens of thousands of cats and dogs each year. But instead of just saying, well, you're terrible pet owners, why aren't we working, if we're all on the same side, why aren't we working together to try and solve some of these issues as a community? It's a community issue.
Correct. And to boil it down to one specific driver is being overly simplistic and doesn't, in my view anyway, it doesn't allow for those difficult conversations that do need to be had, that in the end benefit both the community and the animals, because they enact change. And that's what's needed here. And that's what was one of the things that also struck me about the e-petition that you started, was that, one of the key components was to allow rescue groups to save more animals, to have that involvement, because they are more linked into their communities than shelters perhaps might be, because I don't mean, I'm not casting aspersions on individual workers in shelters here, who all go in with the best intentions and love animals and those sorts of things, but they have to work within a set of specific guidelines that shelter operates under. And therefore, even when they don't feel that they might not necessarily be correct, they're hamstrung by that. And I think there is the door where it's slightly ajar for us all to come in and be in the room and have that discussion and get this change. But Claire, I really want to thank you so much for doing what you've done, the work that you've done with animals, and you continue to do, and the reform that you're seeking.
Thank you. Thank you really for taking on this cause, and I'm very optimistic about where things are going to go from here.
Yeah. So in late October, I'll be bringing a motion to Parliament that looks to take aspects of the petition and bring them directly into that motion to enact change through the legislative process. And the job for me now is to go to work on the rest of the MPs and the government to get the support for that motion. So we'll be doing that hard work, and hopefully we can get that across the line, not just in memory of Dash, but in memory of all the animals that have been in the same situation. And we can, once and for all, have everyone step up to the plate and show their support ending convenience killing in Victoria. Claire, if you could leave our listeners today with one thought, what would it be?
I think it's important to highlight how it's easy to feel quite overwhelmed with the system, the structures that are in place, and the numbers of animals that are being killed. I think it's really important to highlight individual contributions to the solution, which make a difference, which adopt, don't shop, don't get your $6,000 cavoodle from a breeder, de-sex your pets. Choose where you donate your time and your money. There's a lot of local community-based rescue organizations that do amazing work. They don't have the resources, they're volunteer run. So those are the ways that you can be part of the solution. I think it really has to come from top down, and the top and the bottom, which is hopefully where we're headed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, and for your time today as well. And
thank you.
Keep going.
You too. We'll be watching. We'll be
Cheers,
cheering
mate.
from the sidelines.
Bye for now.
See you.